This is Join Us in France, episode 454. 454. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France. Everyday life in France, great places to visit in France, French culture, history, gastronomy, and news related to travel to France. Today, I bring you a trip report with Eva Jorgensen about visiting Marseille as a solo woman. Marseille gets a bad rap, but it's entirely possible to find jewels in this diverse and vibrant city, which is the second largest city in France, as Eva explains. This podcast is supported by donors and listeners who buy my tours and services, including my itinerary consult service and my GPS self-guided tours of Paris on the Voice Map app. And you can browse all of that at my boutique, joinusinfrance.com/boutique. And if you just want to read the details about the tours, get reviews and so forth, go to joinusinfrance.com/Annie Tours. For the magazine part of the podcast, after the interview today, I'll discuss my battle with learning Spanish and perhaps share some tips about language learning in my 50s, which feels like a very different exercise than learning a foreign language in my teens and early 20s. I will also do a quick update about the Olympics coming up in Paris, summer 2024. It's not going to be very long because it's August and not a lot is happening, but I'll mention the helicopter taxis that will make their debut in the sky in Paris for the Olympics. Bonjour, Eva Jorgensen, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie. It's so nice to be here.
Lovely to have you. Today, we want to talk about your solo trip to Marseille. At least the part including Marseille, you were by yourself. This was a bigger trip that you did with a few girlfriends, right?
Yep. And then I took off on my own for a few days in Marseille.
So overall, what did you think about Marseille and when were you there?
I was there, it was right at the end of September, beginning of October.
Of 2022?
Yes. And it was beautiful. It was such a beautiful time of year to be there. The first thing that hit me was the light and the topography, because I wasn't expecting it. For some reason, I wasn't expecting it to be so hilly, all these hills and cliffs going down into the ocean. And it was just so beautiful, the scenery.
Yes.
And then the way the light reflected off of those hills and all the buildings and everything from the ocean, it was pretty incredible.
Yeah, they do say there is something about that light in Provence that is nowhere else. It's really special. And Marseille is a large city, right? So a lot of people are, if they're a bit intimidated by large cities, of course, if they're going to go to a large city in France, they go to Paris, right?
Right.
And you had been to Paris several times as well?
Yes, I've been to Paris many times.
You're familiar with France. Perhaps you speak the language as well?
Not perfectly, but I can get by.
Yeah. Okay. So you decided to take this lovely trip with your girlfriends and you went to Provence together. We might get to that at the end. But then you wanted to take a few days by yourself in Marseille. First of all, what inspired that?
Well, I've been to Provence several times and I'd never been to Marseille and I'd always been intrigued by it. And then the year before this trip, so in the fall of 2021, I did go to Provence and I just came in. I think I must have come in by train into the central train station in Marseille. And from there needed to get to the airport and I was having trouble finding the correct train. And so finally I just took a taxi. I ended up being glad that I did because in that taxi ride, I got to see just a little taste of Marseille from this train station up to the airport. And again, it was that light and the topography, the landscape, even the architecture. It was all so beautiful and intriguing to me. And I just decided I wanted to come back and see Marseille. I wasn't able to on that trip, but I wanted to come back. And so the following year, when I had another trip down to Provence, after the almost week up in the Provence countryside with my girlfriends, I decided to just take a few days for myself and go to Marseille and check it out. And also, I just kind of wanted a relaxing. I'd been traveling for a while and I knew I'd be kind of tired and I just wanted a few quiet days to myself. And I know Marseille doesn't seem like the obvious place to go for that, But I think it was because I was also so curious to explore this city. But also, I know it's right on the ocean. And so I thought, well, I can just get a hotel that's near the beach. And if I want to, just go to the beach every day.
Yeah. So did you do that?
I did. I think I did end up at least walking along the beach every day. But I also saw other things in the city. And it is really great how the city is right on the ocean. So it's really accessible from many different neighborhoods to get to some kind of a beach, or the Corniche, which is the kind of the road and the pathway that go all along the ocean for quite a while.
Yeah. So it's like other people might call it a boardwalk, but it's not a walk, it's a drive. So it's a drive along the coast, which we have in a lot of towns in France. You can actually, usually without too much trouble, you can drive along the coast a long way. You can see a lot of the coast that way. And of course, there's always signs trying to divert you back into the main roads. But if you are persistent, you can do it that way.
And I didn't have a car, so I wasn't driving.
Uh-huh.
But I stayed in a hotel that was maybe a 5-minute walk from the Corniche, actually, and the beach there. So I could just walk down and walk along. There are walking pathways along that road as well. So you can walk or rent a bike or rent a scooter and go along that pathway that goes along the ocean. So yeah, I did that. And it was just beautiful because you can see so far up and down the coast. And to the southern end of Marseille, there are beautiful cliffs and the Calanque that go down into the ocean. And you can see that all along the Corniche.
Right. Yeah. So did you make it all the way to the Calanque?
I did on one day. I decided to try to figure out the bus system. And I took a bus down to all the very, as far south, I'm pretty sure. I think I went on the last bus, as far south as you could go on the Marseille city buses.
Uh-huh.
And it takes you all the way down to the Calanque at the very southern edge of Marseille, which honestly doesn't even feel like you're in a big city anymore. Instead, it just feels like you're in these little fishing villages. And it's really charming. And I think maybe when people, some people don't like Marseille or say they think they don't like Marseille for many reasons. I think maybe some of those people don't realize that you could spend the whole time in Marseille in these quaint little fishing villages in the southern end of the city. And it doesn't even feel like a big city. You can just go to the beach, swim in the water, and it wasn't that crowded. There weren't that many people.
It's interesting what you just said, because just today, we're recording this, I just heard that President Macron is spending 3 days in Marseille because he has this idea that he would like to revitalize the city of Marseille and make it more like Barcelona. So, Barcelona is the second largest city in Spain. It's very vibrant, lots of industry, lots of things happening. Marseille is more difficult as a city. Even though it is the second largest city in France, it has at least people who go there superficially say, there's problem, it's not so clean, there's crime, and there's definitely areas where you do not want to go around Marseille. So the president wants to just shine the light on Marseille and bring more investment, bring more economic activity to the city. And I think it's going to make a huge difference if he manages to do that, because it does need a little bit of a revitalization, I think. What was your feeling about it?
Yeah, I could see that. I just had a few days there, 3 or 4 days. And so, like I said, I wanted to relax. I was at the water, the beach a lot, which was amazing. But I did venture into the city some and go see some shops and different sites. And I loved it, but I definitely was aware of what people say. I was aware of, safety concerns in certain parts of the city. So, there were just parts of the city that I didn't go to, but that's pretty much the same in most big cities like this. Like New York City, there would be parts of the city that I wouldn't go to probably.
Or San Francisco or Paris or, all the big cities, they have bad neighborhoods. And it's kind of sad to put a label of bad neighborhood. But as a visitor, it's not your job to make it better. You're just there to enjoy a relaxing time, and you just don't want to mess with these areas where the more, you don't want to be in the middle of a drug bust. It's not for you to, no, just don't. So it does get this vibe of dangerous city that people say. I don't think I think this has more to do with media portrayals. There's a Marseille series where it's just a crime. So people get this and, perhaps it's outdated stereotypes, but there are still parts of the city where you don't want to go. And those are the unsafe neighborhoods.
But that's really like any other city.
Yeah.
So just like as a solo woman traveling, going to any large city, I would just kind of be aware of which areas I want to stick to and which areas I want to be more careful around or maybe not go to. And so I did that. It was perfectly fine. I felt perfectly safe the entire time.
Yeah.
I stayed in the neighborhood called Beauport. So it's a little bit out of the city center, but not very far.
Mm-hmm.
There were buses you could take to get into the city or just walk or take a taxi. And it worked out great. And I didn't have a car. I was just, like I said, public transport, walking.
Is Beauport near the south end of the city or was it in a different area?
No, it's actually pretty close to the old port, is kind of the center of the city that people talk about. Beauport is just maybe a 20 to 30 minute walk south of that. So that's really like the city itself goes much, much further. When I was talking about the Calanque, those were at least a 30-minute bus ride.
Okay, so much further. Yeah. So in Marseille, the things to do is to go to the Vieux Port. Then you have the art museum. I don't know if you made it to the art museum.
I didn't make it there. No, because this is more I love art museums and now I have to go back. But because this was just my relaxing getaway at the end, I didn't worry too much about going to museums. It was more about just exploring neighborhoods and going to the beach, which was great.
Yeah, the other thing that stands out in Marseille is the Cosquer cave, the reproduction of the painted cave.
That's supposed to be amazing. Yeah. And is that the one that is underwater too?
Right. So the original is underwater, but the reproduction is not. The reproduction is not very far from the Modern Art Museum. It's in that very highly visited kind of part of the city, which is completely safe and very pleasant to walk around.
Oh, yes.
Then the other area that's very nice is the Basilica. I'm sure you went.
I did go there. That was pretty close to my hotel, like a 15 or 20 minute walk. Mm-hmm. So through up and down hills, like this very charming, hilly residential neighborhood. And so I walked up there. It ended up being a Sunday. And so I walked in and I went inside to see inside the Basilica with all the other tourists. And it's just beautiful. They have all these model ships that are hanging from the ceiling, which is really charming. And while I was in there, I noticed that all the tourists were leaving and a mass was about to start. So they said, you can stay if you want, but you just need to sit respectfully during the mass and not just keep wandering around. So I decided, why not? For the moment, I just decided to sit down and be there for it. And I'm not Catholic. I'm not super familiar with the mass, but it was beautiful. It was interesting to see. And it was nice that they allowed, just whoever wanted to be able to stay and listen.
Was there a big attendance in the Basilica? I would assume that a Basilica would get quite a few parishioners.
Yeah, it did actually, because probably it's the most well-known Basilica or church in Marseille, I'm sure. So yeah, it was well attended and it was a very nice experience. It was in French and probably some Latin that I wasn't understanding, but I could follow along a little bit with some of what was going on, and they passed out little flyers so you could read and follow along. And then the view up there from around the cathedral was just incredible. You can see all over Marseille, to the islands, to the downtown city, everything. There's this famous soccer field or football field that's just below the Basilica, kind of built into the cliff with a high-rise apartment building next to it. It's really picturesque and amazing. And you can see that and the city behind and everything. So definitely just worth it to go see the view, to see the beautiful Basilica.
Yeah. So the Basilica is called Notre-Dame de la Garde, and it has this beautiful golden Virgin Mary on top.
And stripes, like black and white stripes, which is pretty distinctive on the outside of the building.
Yes, it has this a little bit oriental feel to it. I'll post some photos of it. It really is a striking place. And the inside has lots of gold and, it's almost Byzantine kind of style of church. It is very beautiful. Now, it's on top of the rock, so getting up there is not as easy as walking around the old port.
It was a hike. It was a hike. I walked up there and it was definitely quite a hike to get up there, which I didn't mind. I liked that. But I did see that there were little tourist trams that you could take up there. If you prefer not to hike, you can get a ride on one of these little trams that will take you up there.
Like the little tourist trains is what I call them. And which I take them sometimes. So don't get me wrong. These are fine. Especially if you only have a few hours, you take the tourist train and you get off. If it's an on and off thing, it's pretty good actually, because you get off at all the interesting things. And a few hours later, you've seen, the highlights of the city, which is great. There's also city buses that will take you up there if you're willing to figure out the city bus system. And Marseille has a really good public transportation, just like the rest of France.
Yeah, I have to say, when I took the bus down to the Calanque, I was a little nervous, like, oh, is this going to be tricky, hard to figure out? Sometimes buses can be hard to figure out. But it honestly wasn't that bad. I just looked it up on Google Maps, I think, and I just went to the bus stop and waited and paid on the bus for the ticket, and it was easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So on a bus, you don't want to show up with a 50 euro bill. You want to have a 10 or a 5 or, smaller bills. And if you have exact change, they prefer that. Of course, it's faster. But most buses in France, they will sell you a ticket right on the bus. It might be to discourage people buying tickets right on the bus, which keeps the driver busy. They might give you a discount if you buy outside of the bus, if you buy online or if you buy. Sometimes at the bus stops, you can buy tickets. Sometimes not. It just depends on exactly where you are. But that's a really good way to get around in a city like Marseille.
Yeah, I would recommend it. And even the bus driver that took me to the Calanque at the very end, he was so friendly. There was just me and 2 other tourists on the bus when we got to the very last Calanque.
So he knows he's taking tourists to the Calanques, yeah.
He knows. And because it was and this was a mini bus at that point, like a small, like half-size bus. And because it was the end of the line and he had to wait for about 10 minutes before turning around and going back the other direction, he got out and he said, "Let me take your pictures." And he basically acted as a photographer and told us where to pose with the Calanque in the background and took all these photos of us. And he insisted.
Oh, that's fun.
It was really charming.
It's better than standing there and doing nothing for 10 minutes. So, yeah.
Right.
It's more entertaining for him, too. Oh, that's cool. Could he speak some English?
I think let's see. I think he did speak a little English, yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So just to finish up our list, and I know we got off of it, but our list of things that people say are not fun about Marseille, they say it's dirty and run down. And of course, some parts of it is dirty and run down. Some areas are not as wealthy as others. This is true in every city.
But there's a lot of theory and charm too,
Yes.
So it didn't bother me. At least the areas I was in, I didn't really notice or that it seemed dirty or run down.
No. I mean, for the most part, it's not going to be striking, but it just depends on what you're used to as well. It depends where you live to begin with and all of that. Some people say, there's high poverty rates, and it's true. That's, like I mentioned earlier, some of Marseille needs to be kind of gentrified and, helped along somehow. In France, we don't do gentrification the way Americans do, but we have a lot of associations that bring business into the areas and try to help that way. Some people say it's only a port city, so that's boring. And I'm like, no. Marseille has a long history. We did a whole episode about the history of Marseille with Elise. It's one of the early episodes that we published. And it has a really long history. And as a matter of fact, you cannot learn about the plague, the history of the major plagues that have come through Europe without Marseille. A lot of them went through there,
It's a fascinating history. That's true.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Some people say the residents are aggressive. Did you find anybody who was aggressive?
No. Everyone I came into contact with was very friendly. So I didn't see that.
I think if you don't go looking for aggressive, you're not going to find it. Honestly, it just depends what you do. I think Marseille is just like anywhere else. People are mostly friendly. And if you stick to the areas that are interesting to tourists, why would anybody be aggressive to tourists? And there's also people who say, oh, why go to Marseille? The cultural offerings are limited, whatever. And that is absolutely not true. There are some fabulous museums in Marseille. If you want museums.
There are. I was looking at them all, researching them all, and I know I need to go back to see them. I was busy in those 3 days, just like I said, with different beaches, with different shops, with restaurants. But I could have spent easily several more days, if not more, just going to the different museums and things like that.
And of course, if you are into literature, you have heard of Alexandre Dumas, and Château d'If is a major plot area in Marseille. Did you take a boat ride to the Château d'If or no?
No, I didn't. It was really, I can go over some of the great places that I did go to, but I didn't hit those, except for the Basilica.
Yeah.
I didn't hit those the most known tourist things because I wanted a more mellow, under the radar kind of experience.
So tell us about the places you did go that you enjoyed.
Okay. Well, one feature I wanted to point out, besides going to the Calanque, which we talked about, which are incredible and I definitely recommend.
You can take a boat from the port of Marseille to the Calanque if you want. So you can take like an hour or 2-hour ride along to the Calanque.
Yes, I would definitely recommend that. I did that from Cassis and that was incredible. I'm sure it's very similar from the port of Marseille.
Yeah.
But there's a little beach, a rocky beach. So a lot of the beach, when you're closer to the city part of Marseille, is more like rocks along the beach. But there's some great spots. And one that I found, which is near my hotel, that was really great, it's the rocky part right under a hotel called Le Petit Nice. So that's a famous hotel in Marseille, like an old fancy hotel right on the water. And the rocks on the beach underneath the hotel are open to the public. So it's a great spot to just go, bring a towel, lay out on the rock, and then you can jump in the water and go swimming from there. And very charming and picturesque. And you can kind of look down the coast and see more cliffs and things. And it was a great spot.
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
If you just find that hotel, Le Petit Nice, it's pretty easy to kind of just follow the pathway down to the rocks.
Excellent. Very good.
And then there's some charming little ports right along there. There's one that's called the Anse de Maldormé and the Anse de Malmusc. I don't know what Anse means.
Une anse is like it's a curved...
Like a cove?
Yes, that's how you would translate it. Because la anse is like if you have a basket, it's something circular that you use to hold something. So it's going to be a cove, yes.
Okay. So those two coves, which are pretty close to this Petit Nice hotel, are just really charming. Like if you picture a little picturesque, beautiful little fishing cove in Marseille, these are great ones to look at. And, to bring a picnic. I found a spot along the road just above the Petit Nice. There's a road that has a bunch of little shops and businesses. And I just found a random pizza place around there. Got a pizza, went down to one of these the Anse de Malmusc, I think, and just sat there at sunset and ate my pizza for dinner one night. And that was great. I mean, just so simple. And it was so enjoyable. I loved it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And back to the Basilica, I was going to say there's a neighborhood right below the Basilica that's worth going to. It's called Vauban.
Right, because it's part of the Vauban fortifications.
It's an area that has some cute little restaurants and shops. I guess you'd say been maybe gentrified a little bit, where it feels a little hipster or something. I ended up going there after the mass on Sunday and getting brunch at this little place called Carlotta Wit. And they had a little terrace, and it was just a very nice, charming atmosphere on this charming little street. And that's worth it if people are interested in just exploring something that's more like a real neighborhood that people live in, but also has some charming things to visit. That was a great place. Cool. And I ended up walking further up that road, and I happened on a party that the church was throwing, it turned out. You couldn't miss it because there was this brass band, so you could hear the music throughout the neighborhood. And I was kind of just following the music, like, what is this?
Yeah.
And then I turned the corner and I looked, and there was this courtyard in front of this building that had picnic tables set up, and people were eating and people were dancing and listening to the music. And I saw the priest from the mass was there dancing. And it was just like this neighborhood Sunday afternoon party. And it was so charming.
That's cool.
To see that. So I think it's definitely worth just kind of wandering around the neighborhood afterwards.
The Vauban neighborhood. Oh, that's cool. And what was the name of the restaurant you said?
It was called Carlotta with.
With?
Yeah, I don't know why the word with.
Okay. Carlotta with. Okay.
And actually, there was a pizza place there that's supposed to be amazing called La Bonne Mère that I didn't get to go to, but it's supposed to be amazing.
A lot of things are called La Bonne Mère in Marseille. Bonne Mère. This is something they say. In English, I don't know, you say, oh my goodness. Well, in Marseille, they say, oh, bonne mère. It's like a local. Yeah, it's just a local silly.
Oh, I like that.
But that's the good mother. So, of course, it's Mother Mary. The Virgin Mary is what it's referring to. It's kind of a expletive, but it's not rude or mean or anything. It's like, oh, bonne mère. Yeah.
I like that.
Now that you heard it, you'll hear it a million times. They say this.
Now I will. I'm
Probably
sure.
the older folks, though. I'm sure the young, hip people don't. They try to avoid that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, another great neighborhood to go to that has a lot of a concentration of things that I think people would like to visit is it's not far from the old port. It's just up from there. And there's a store called Maison Empereur.
Okay.
Which is like a home goods store and also kind of a hardware store and a general store all in one. It's really cool and very unique. It's 2 levels and it's wood everywhere, like wood paneling. It feels very, very charming and very old fashioned, like it's been there forever. And I think it has been there a very long time. And so you can buy anything from like drawer pulls to I bought some pillowcases for my bed. I bought these little wooden egg cups that you put for hard-boiled eggs in all different colors. And then they have a lot of fun toys, like old-fashioned toys and things for kids. If you have kids, it would be a great place to go. That was an amazing store. I would definitely recommend that for anyone who goes to Marseille. And right in that same neighborhood, there's a restaurant and a little shop, food shop. They're owned by the same people and they're both called L'Idéal.
Okay.
So the ideal,
Yes.
like the ideal restaurant and the ideal épicerie.
Yeah.
And I ate at the restaurant and got a couple little things at the épicerie and they're very charming and very good. There's also the restaurant Chez Mina right around the corner, which is a traditional Moroccan like couscous kind of place. That was great too. It has a very fun atmosphere. I ate at both those places.
It's really cool because you did a lot of things that locals would do. This is not the normal touristy track. So that's wonderful that you're telling us about it. I'm looking through your photo and you sent me a photo of a table and chairs and a sun umbrella right by the water.
Oh yeah, that was down near the Calanque. Down near the Calanque, there's actually a hotel and a restaurant that are fairly new. They just opened the last several years I believe it's called Tuba Club.
Oh,
Let me look at, Tuba Club.
Tuba.
I actually looked into staying there, but I booked this little Marseille leg of my trip. I booked very last minute, basically a week before I went there. So most of the hotels were filled up, but I was looking into staying at the Tuba Club. That looked very charming to just stay. If you wanted kind of a beach getaway and you're, more like a beach getaway that's more quiet and relaxed and everything, that would be a great place to stay because it's at that Calanque at the southern end of the city. It just feels like your getaway from the whole world. And those table and chairs were right there in front of the hotel. And they have a restaurant that's also overlooking the water. I mean, it was very, very sweet and charming. Yes.
So you sent me a lot of photos that have this typical glow of the light, the Provençal light. Did you mostly take your photos in the evening or first thing in the morning?
I was just taking them throughout the day.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
I think there are several that are from the evening, from golden hour. That's probably what it is because I'm not a huge early riser. I'm not up at dawn. No. So if it would have been that, if you're thinking morning or evening, those ones are probably evening that you're looking at. But the light was just beautiful all day, I felt like, but especially at golden hour and sunset.
So these are not beaches with a lot of sand. I mean, the photos that you sent me,
no,
there's a lot of flat rocks. So you can put your towel down on the flat rocks and then you have to, I suppose, carefully go into the water and bring water shoes. Otherwise, you're going to cut your feet.
Yes. Although a lot of them it's where I was going, that Petite Nice beach that I mentioned, and then down at the Kalong. Actually, you jumped in the water
Ah,
and it was just deep. It was just deep already.
ah.
So those two beaches that I talked about, that was that kind of a beach. So not as great for little kids if you have little kids, but if you're with people who are strong swimmers, you can just jump right in the water and you're just swimming.
But
right
then you have to
away.
get out. You have to get out somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to kind of climb in and out of those big flat rocks like you were talking about. If you want a more flat beach, then there is a beach that I went by on the bus that I saw. And let me look it up on the map. It's a famous area. Okay. Plage du Prado.
Oh, the Prado, yes.
Yes, that area down there is that part of Marseille is unlike the rest of the city. It's very flat. And so they have big, wide, flat beaches. I think some of them might be sandy even down there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have little kids and are wanting something more gentle like that, then that would be a good place to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you sent me some really very fun photos. I'll probably just post them on Instagram. Do you have your own Instagram account where people can see these things? Tell us, what's the name?
It's Eva Jorgensen Travel. So just my name with an EN and then travel.
Very good. Yeah, you sent some really fun photos. I'll try and remember to tag you on
Thank
all
you.
of these photos. Yeah. And it looks like you went into one museum anyway. I'm seeing some statues. Where did you go? Let's see.
Oh, that might have been up in Provence more, because I was in Provence before and I did send you some photos from Provence. I believe that was in Aix-en-Provence.
In Aix-en-Provence. Lovely stuff. You really had a very fun time. So, Marseille, describe the people who would enjoy Marseille most. What sort of people are they?
I would say it could be both. It could be people who love the seaside, who love the ocean, who love beautiful scenery like the cliffs going down into the ocean and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the only part that you love, then you could stay in the southern part of the city where the Kalong are. But then people who really love culture, who love going to shops and restaurants and museums and things like that, and like a city with a lot of energy, then I think those kind of people would love to go to visit Marseille and the city itself.
Yeah.
I travel a lot with people who are creative types who love art and design and that kind of thing. And I think those kind of people would love Marseille because it has a lot of young up and coming artists and designers who are doing really interesting things.
Yeah, a bit edgy feel to it. Just a little bit. Not anything crazy, but yeah, a bit of an edge. Yeah.
A little bit of an edge. So if you like that sort of thing, like there's a shop called Sessun Alma they're actually a chain French clothing store that's all over the country. But this one in Marseille is special because they have a special shop that they carry local artists like ceramics and homemade things like that from local artists, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're into that kind of thing, I think Marseille is a great spot to go to as well.
Yeah.
If you want everything to be perfectly classical, neat and tidy, I guess this isn't the place, but I don't know. But I guess I don't know where you would go instead.
Go to Nice or Cannes.
Okay.
If you need everything just so, go to Nice or Cannes.
Okay. Good advice. But if you don't mind things being just a little like higher energy and a little bit of an edge, then I think Marseille is great. And I loved it. I really loved it. Mm-hmm. And as a woman traveling alone, it was, people were like, "Oh, are you sure you want to do that?" But if you're just aware of your surroundings, like anywhere else, it was great. Yeah.
So this is a problem because even French people embrace this idea that Marseille is somehow dangerous. If you ask some French people, they'll tell you, "Oh yeah, never go to Marseille." But that's because they watch the news and they know about all the stuff.
I recently went to Paris, and I won't get into all that except to say the same thing happened with the news. People are like, "Are you sure you want to go to Paris right now?" Because here in the US, we were seeing all these news reports of all the strikes everywhere and protests and the trash on the streets everywhere. And it just looked like it was utter chaos in Paris. And I asked some local Parisian friends, should I still come? And they're like, "Oh yeah, just come." And I went. And honestly, I didn't see a thing that was in the for the week that I was there, I didn't see a thing. So it just goes to show that things do get really blown out of proportion a lot of times.
Obviously, news people, they want to go to the sensational. If you watch French news, you never want to go to Chicago ever again, or, anywhere where there's a shooting, because it's a big deal. Well, Americans go about their lives around these shootings just fine, it seems. Just keep it in mind. If you see it on the news, it's obviously sensationalized, or it's at least, even if it's not sensationalized, it's at least a very narrow point of view on one thing happening in one place. It's not, you cannot generalize it to the rest of the country.
Yes, exactly.
So as someone who's been to France many times, I do want to ask you about the pastries, because you wrote down that you did not like the pastries in Marseille. I want to know why. Are they that different? I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I'm picky. Okay. I will fully admit that I am picky. I'm very picky about food. I love food, and I love a variety of different kinds of foods and different types of cuisines, but the quality of the food I'm pretty picky about. I just didn't think the pastries in Marseille and the south of France, like Provence in general, were nearly as good as the ones in Paris. I know that's probably controversial. I'm going to make people mad for saying that. But I don't know. It wasn't something I could really pinpoint. They didn't taste quite as good. I was like, are they not using all like butter? I don't know what it is exactly.
I couldn't tell you, but I'm going to Provence next week. And so I will test your theory.
I did find one place that I loved that had good pastries. And that was in Ile-sur-la-Sorgue. And it was called Pâtisserie Jouvin, I think.
Ah, well, very good, because I am staying in Ile-sur-la-Sorgue. Lucky me.
Well, there you go. Well, lucky you. Yeah, that place I loved, and I thought they had great pastries. But that was the only one that I thought was really up there with the quality. I'm not saying that the pastries everywhere were terrible. They just, to me, weren't quite worth it. I'd eat it and be like, that wasn't quite worth it. It wasn't as good as I had hoped.
Yeah, not worth the calories kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How about the bread? Was the bread the same, or was that different too?
I think I did have some good bread. bread. I remember at Épicerie Idéale in the restaurant Idéale in Marseille, I remember having some really good bread, and I think some other places as well. And I had great food. I mean, amazing food.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that was interesting about the pastries. Also really great ice cream, gelato in Provence. So don't worry, I ate well.
Yeah. So what are some local foods that you recommend people try? Or wines? I don't know if you drank any wine, but...
I'm not a wine drinker. I know people that I have been with have, and they love it, but I'm not an expert, so I can't speak to that.
Okay.
But let's see. Oh, I have to say, in Aix-en-Provence, of course, they're famous for the Calisson candies. And I really did find the ones that I think are the best are the ones right on that main street, the Cours Mirabeau. They have, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's one of the old, like very well-known places, like right there on the Cours Mirabeau that's been there forever. It's very charming.
Okay. I hate Calisson, so I am not going to...
Oh, you hate Calisson?
Can't eat them, no.
I'll have to look it up and send you that for the show notes, because that place was amazing. And again, I didn't really love their pastries, but their Calisson were incredible. I'll send you that note for the show notes.
Yeah, fantastic.
So just one more place to point out for food in Provence in general is if they have a chance, go to Paulin in Avignon, because it was a Michelin star restaurant, a Michelin star meal. We went for lunch and it was 40 euros fixed price for everything. Starter, main, dessert, plus there were several other little amuse-bouche that they threw in there, and it was incredible. It was so delicious. They were very charming, very kind, very nice service, not snooty at all. And it was incredible. And we couldn't believe we got all of that, everything included, for 40 euros a person.
Yeah. And so did the meal take forever though?
It took a while. We were probably, hour and a half to 2 hours, somewhere in there.
Okay. Which to some people is an eternity. Americans, well, some of them, they want to eat in 15 minutes and be out of there. So
this is true. But don't you find almost any sit-down restaurant in France that will take you about that long to eat?
Not 2 hours, but yeah, an hour is the minimum. If it's a sit-down restaurant, an hour is the minimum. The fancier the restaurant, the longer you're going to stay. It's at least an hour and a half, sometimes more. And it just depends on the vibe of the place.
True. And how many people you're with. If it's a bigger group, it's going to take longer, of course.
But it's worth it. If you enjoy that sort of experience, it's well worth it. It just depends what you want, If you want to eat quick and get out of there, don't go to a place like that.
Yeah. No, true. And there's just plenty of the markets everywhere, always love to just go to a market and just eat whatever I find at the market, bread, cheese, sausage, all the produce. They're just amazing. And especially anywhere in Provence, Marseille, the markets were incredible.
You've been to France many times. So is there something you learned on that trip about France or about Marseille that you want to share with everybody?
Well, let's see. One is just what we've already talked about Marseille and how incredible it was, because this was really my first true visit to Marseille. And I just was blown away and I fell in love with it. And I can't wait to go back. And another thing is, one place that I had discovered on the previous trip that I think was just incredible. I think you've talked about it maybe on the podcast, is the Villa-Lacoste, which is in the countryside of Provence, not far from Aix-en-Provence. And it is an incredible place to go. You could spend a whole day. There's a winery. You should go on wine tours if you want to do that. There's a whole outdoor art walk through the wine fields and through the forest and all these things that has all these world-class, internationally famous artists' pieces in it. And it's so incredible. And then they have 3 or 4 restaurants on site as well. So you can get an amazing meal. And we ate at the Italian one called Vanina on the terrace there. And it was so good and charming. So that was just an incredible place that I think a lot of people would enjoy.
Yeah. So it's Villa La Coste. It's in 3 words. Yeah. And it's not far from Aix-en-Provence. Let's see. Is the address? Oh, no. The address is actually Le Puy Sainte-Réparade. Okay. It's close to Aix.
Yeah. Maybe a 15-minute drive, I want to say, something like that, So that was really incredible. And also
So this is good for pampering. If you want to be pampered for the day, just take it easy and relax. And do they have a spa and all that?
They do have a spa, so you could go book. I'm sure I didn't do that, but I'm sure you could go book a massage at the spa or something if you wanted as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Very cool. Anything you do not recommend people do? Did you make any mistakes? Did anything went wrong during this trip?
Let's see.
Because in your document, you mentioned a scooter. You rented a scooter and you weren't sure where to return it.
Oh, that was tricky. I did rent a scooter one evening to ride along the Corniche. I thought that would be fun. And it was very fun. And then it came time to go back to my hotel and I could not figure out where to leave that scooter. It was one of those things where I found a spot where there were a bunch of other scooters parked. So I thought, this will be where I can park it. And it said the scooter was telling me it wasn't an official parking spot. And then I was having trouble finding where an official parking spot was and I needed to get back. And so I ended up just leaving it with all those other scooters. So it wasn't a totally random spot. It was with a bunch of other scooters. So yeah, luckily they didn't charge me, but they said if I did it again, they would charge me. That was the thing I thought next time in advance, I'd figure out plan it out in advance. If I rented the scooter, okay, where can I drop this off? Is it where I'm going to be ending up?
Yeah. Pick up and drop off are important.
Get that sorted out before you just take off. That's just a little thing I would have done differently. And also driving in Marseille I only drove in. I had a car up in Provence and then drove into Marseille and dropped it off at the train station. And that was quite an ordeal. Of course, I was going right to the train station, which is in the middle of the city, probably the trickiest part to drive it. And so that was not fun. And I would not have wanted to drive around more in that central part of the city. But yeah, some people probably wouldn't be any big deal at all. But yeah, no, overall it went really well. Nothing went very wrong.
And you got scolded for talking on the train.
Oh, that's right. Yes. So my girlfriends and I were taking the train from Paris down to Provence. And as we got on the train in Paris, we were just still getting situated, putting our bags away and figuring out where everybody would sit and everything. And we were just chatting as we were doing that. And the train hadn't even left the station yet. But I guess we were the noisy Americans because everybody else on that train was quiet, just quietly sitting there. Mm-hmm. And this woman came up to us and we felt like kids and like she was a school teacher lecturing us. She was like, in France, we don't talk on the train. In France, we're quiet on the train. You need to stop talking. And we just we all just sat there and looking very sheepish and like, okay. And then we were quiet. We were quiet the rest of the time. And then when we arrived in the train station in Provence, a different woman, French woman, came up to us and said, I heard that other woman give you a lecture at the beginning of the train ride, but I just want to tell you that you did a very good job and you're very quiet. And so then we felt like she was like the nice teacher giving us the good lecture. Like we did a good job at the end of the train ride. It was pretty funny.
Oh, that's adorable. And I don't know that French people are particularly quiet on trains, but it's true that in public transportation, you normally don't want to be too loud. It makes sense. There's a lot of people around. Well, Eva, thank you so much for talking to me about Marseille and what you enjoyed about it. And I love that you did some things that it wouldn't have occurred to me to recommend to anybody. So that's fantastic. That's really, new things to consider. And it's true that Marseille is a beautiful town. You need to get over all the negative stereotypes. They're not necessarily right. You might be wrong about some things.
This is true. Yeah, I agree. And Marseille is incredible. Definitely worth a visit. I loved it.
Merci beaucoup, Eva.
Merci, Annie. Have a good day.
You too. Au revoir. Again, I want to thank my patrons for giving back and supporting the show. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing that. You can see them at patreon.com/joinus. Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you have been doing it for a long time, and I am really appreciative of that. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Anne Wunsch from Australia, Tonya Isle from the US, and also Martina Cucciara, which I think is also from the US. I so appreciate people who donate to the podcast because they enjoy it and they want it to keep going. To pitch in, please visit patreon.com/joinus. And to support Elise, go to patreon.com/EliseArt, ELYSART. This week, I added a new Patreon reward that I think you will enjoy. Patrons will get invites to Zoom meetings with me on different days and times to accommodate people who live in different time zones. At first, it'll be Ask Me Anything type of format, and then I'll probably think of topics that we can explore together. It'll be lovely spending time face-to-face with patrons. So patrons, look for that invite in your inbox this week. And of course, you can also take advantage of my expertise as your personal itinerary consultant. I offer 2 levels of service now. The Bonjour service. This is the least expensive and usually the one where you can get an appointment the fastest. With the Bonjour service, we talk for an hour. You ask me all your questions. I give you my suggestions. And you're ready to make decisions about whatever you are struggling with. You can also go with the VIP service, which is more expensive. And we also talk for an hour, but then I send you a detailed document that outlines everything we discussed, as well as a summary of the best advice shared on this podcast. So to get started, purchase the service, go to joinusinfrance.com/boutique, and you'll get emails guiding you through the process. It's fairly simple. And this week, I have some feedback about the VIP experience from Joe O'Reilly.
Bonjour, Annie. This is Joe O'Reilly. Recently, you helped my wife, Mary Beth, and I with an itinerary for Avignon, Gourd, an upcoming trip. You obviously were paying close attention to us because you really addressed all our questions and concerns in your 74-page itinerary, and it's amazing. It came the next day faster than Amazon expedited service. It really was something. We're going to these places in Provence and the Luberon for the first time and maybe the only time in our lives. So it was important that we be provided with as much information as possible for us to make some wise choices in figuring out how to spend our time. And you have given us the information we need to do that. We're staying in Avignon for 5 days, and you've given us thoughts on the other neighboring, Arles, Pont-du-Gard, Aix-en-Provence, the other neighboring areas, and what to see and what can be seen, where to go, possible places to eat, tips on driving, parking. when not to drive, all the information we need to make intelligent decisions and get the maximum appreciation out of our trip. So we couldn't be more happy with your service. Listen regularly to your podcast. They're wonderful. They're entertaining. And we feel much more comfortable about our upcoming trip and the places we'll go, the things we'll see. We asked even about a possible cooking school, and you gave us some good choices there. So your service is wonderful. Thank you for providing it. I encourage anybody who's going to France and not already on some sort of a tour to take advantage of what you offer. Thanks again. Merci beaucoup. And au revoir, Annie.
Thank you, Joe. And if my schedule is fully booked, you know about the Voice Map tours. They make your life easy. I've got 5 tours: the Eiffel Tower, available in French or English, Île de la Cité, Le Marais, Montmartre, Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and the Latin Quarter. You can download them when you buy them, and you can listen at home if you'd like. Then when you get to Paris, at long last, open Voice Map, go to the appointed start of the tour, and I'll start talking. It's as easy as that. You can access my tours directly from the Voice Map app if you're in a hurry. But if you purchase the tour codes from joinusinfrance.com/boutique, you'll receive a special listener discount. But that purchase is not immediate. Count on a few hours before you get your codes, okay? All right. About learning Spanish. I have been going to Spain since I was a child and somehow never learned Spanish. In school, I took English, German, and Italian. I never got any good at German, and I don't go to Germany, so I never felt the need. But I could hold a basic conversation in Italian. I remember reading Il Visconte di Mezzato by Italiano Calvino in the original Italian and enjoying it immensely. So my Italian was not fluent by any stretch of the imagination, but I could talk. And whenever I went back to Italy, it would come back, you know. Spanish was another matter, which is sad because my ancestry 4 generations back is pretty much all Spanish. Why I never learned it in school is silly. It's probably because my mother wanted me to, so, you know, I was a dumb kid and refused. At any rate, here I am at age 58 with a strong desire to be able to converse in Spanish, and it's not easy. So here's what I've done so far. I've completed Pimsleur Castilian Spanish Level 1, and I did it faithfully. This is one where you do a half-an-hour lesson every day, and you don't do more than that, you don't do less than that, but you have to do your half hour every day. Pimsleur is not as popular as language learning apps these days, but I like how it works better because it forces me to talk and make my own sentences. The whole point of Pimsleur is to stimulate me to say things in Spanish. It doesn't make me choose answer A, B, or C, but rather it makes me think of the answer myself, and it's quite the gymnastic. Some of the lessons I did twice because I could tell I hadn't assimilated enough of the content. But I think I've gotten most of the stuff in level 1, and I'll start on level 2 this week. I also have a tutor that I meet on Skype for an hour twice each week. This is someone who works at a language school in Sitges full-time, and he takes me on after hours. I met him because I'm renting his parents' garage, to tell you the truth. And they told me, oh, our son teaches Spanish. And I'm like, oh, I need to talk to him. Anyway, I get to make a spectacular fool of myself, telling him about my day in Spanish every time we have a lesson. You know, then he helps me get the words out, and he writes down a better way to say these things than what I came up with. He doesn't do the talking for me. He just writes it down. And then he lets me memorize those things later, which, you know, I've tried to memorize them, but I keep forgetting some, and then he reminds me, and he's very good. He makes me do drills, reading comprehension, things like that, but mostly he listens to me butcher his language. And that's what I like about this, is that for an hour, I do 90% of the talking. He explains a little bit of grammar, but we don't go into any depth with that. It's mostly giving me examples, you know. And understanding grammar is not going to make anybody conversant. Talking makes you conversant. My goal is that by June 2024, I'll be able to chat in Spanish and not make their ears bleed. I'm very lucky. I get to go to Spain on a regular basis and I have to talk to people about everyday life things. I'm doing renovations in my apartment and I don't expect tradespeople to know English or French. Sign language and Google Translate have got me by so far, but I want to do better. I also had to go talk to bike shop folks this last week. Tips for you trying to learn French, especially if you're not a spring chicken anymore. Step 1, do at least half an hour of French every day. Every day, half an hour. It's hard to fit it in, I know, but do that. Step 2, find opportunities to use your French. There are language exchange apps and websites. If you search for language learning community, find one that works for you. This is where you get to speak the language you want to learn and they get to practice English with you. I think that works really well. Come to France if you can, of course, as well. But don't count on practicing your French with waiters in Paris. They all speak English and they won't have time to suffer through your hesitant French. Go out of Paris, go to places that are not touristy, and we talk about them all the time in this podcast. That's where you'll find the boulangerie lady who wants to hear your French. Take the bus, talk to the driver, ask for directions from strangers on the street, be chatty. People who work at the tourist office will probably speak English with you. That's to be expected. But storekeepers and bus drivers in rural places in France probably won't. And let me just say this. If you're not talking, but rather choosing the correct response and earning points, it's not language learning. It's a game. À bon entendeur, salut. Which means a word to the wise. About the flying taxis that are supposed to be flying around Paris during the Olympics, they look like giant drones. They have 15 blades, 15 little blades all arranged around a circle. They are all electric. For now, they carry one pilot and one passenger. They already fly, but not commercially yet. And there should be 10 of them ready for commercial service by the time the Olympics start. The heliport for this machine is at Issy-les-Moulineaux. It's right by the 15th arrondissement. There's been a helicopter development group at Issy-les-Moulineaux for decades. And they are now also working on much lighter helicopters that make 5 times less noise. They are a lot nimbler and they are full electric. I love it. During the Olympics, they'll be used to transport VIPs and they will go places where it's, time is of the essence kind of thing. Eventually, they'll be licensed to land on any heliport at a hospital, especially. They'll be used for medical evacuations, organ transplants, that sort of thing. Because even if you have the police escorting a vehicle that needs to get to a hospital quickly, it's not as fast as a helicopter. They are working on a machine that can move up to 4 people. That's going to be scary. I know that Boeing has plans for pilotless drones that can carry passengers. That's not going to be allowed in Europe for a long time, if ever. The French company doing this is called the Velocity. Look them up. It's cool. They hope to make it affordable as well. They want to sell each ride for between 100 and 200 euros per person, which is really not that much money. So wait and see where this goes, but it sounds like it's going to be really cool. Thanks to podcast editors Anne and Christian Kotoven who produced the transcripts. Use the website. It's really helpful. It'll help you find all these non-touristy places that perhaps you don't remember the names of. If you look for Off the Beaten Track on Join Us in France, you'll find several. Next week on the podcast, an episode with Elise called France for Bookworms. I love bookworms. I am a bookworm. And I hope you are too. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2023 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.